I shouldn't have gone to Redwood Forest. I took a trip to Shadow Falls, Massachusetts to visit a friend of mine from college. He just moved there a few months earlier and kept telling me how much he liked it, so I figured I'd come out for a few days and see the place for myself. The plan was simple. Coffee in Midtown, then a hike in the mountains just outside the city. While we were sitting in the booth at the coffee shop, talking through the details of the hike, I asked him what the trail was called. Redwood Forest, he said. The moment he said it, I noticed someone staring at us. An older man sat alone in the booth beside ours. He had been drinking his coffee, but now his cup was sitting untouched on the table, his eyes locked on us. Not curious, but focused. My friend noticed it too. After a few uncomfortable seconds, we politely asked if everything was okay, if there was something he needed. The man leaned forward slightly and in a low, raspy voice said, "You can't go there." We exchanged a look. "Go where?" I asked. His eyes didn't blink. "If you go to Redwood Forest," he said, "you may never return the same again." My friend laughed nervously and asked him why. The old man reached into his jacket with a shaking hand and pulled out a pen. He grabbed the napkin beneath his coffee cup and began to draw. He was slow and deliberate. When he finished, he slid the napkin across the table toward us. It was a trail map, not detailed like a real one, but very specific with turns, bends, markings, all laid out in a way that felt intentional. "If you go," he said, "you follow this exactly. If you don't, you won't make it back." My friend thanked him politely and said we had plenty of hiking experience. The old man's posture stiffened. "You take it," he said sharply. His voice became firm, loud enough that a coffee shop employee stepped over to make sure everything was all right. I assured her we were fine. As we stood to leave, I felt a strong instinct telling me not to walk away without that napkin. So I grabbed it and slipped it into my back pocket before my friend noticed. As we left, the employee apologized for the man's behavior. She told us he was a war veteran, a former park ranger, and that he'd been struggling with dementia for years. I felt bad. I chalked it up to that and tried to forget about it. Then we drove to Redwood Forest anyway. When we arrived, it was beautiful. The oak trees were massive. The scenery was very naturistic. The kind of place people go to escape from the outside world. We loaded our backpacks with water, trail mix, and basic supplies, then followed the trail. At first, everything felt normal. But the farther we went, the denser the forest became. The trees started blocking out the sunlight, and it got darker fast. Patches of sunlight appeared in the distance, just enough to see where we were going. That's when we saw the backpack. It was torn open, with belongings scattered across the ground like someone had flung it into the air. There was a phone, wallet, and clothes. None of it made sense. I picked up the wallet and put it in my pocket, thinking maybe we'd run into whoever it belonged to further down the trail. A few steps later, the sunlight hit something else. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at as something pale laid across the dirt ahead of us, half covered in leaves. My brain tried to make sense of it until we got closer, and the shape became impossible to ignore. It was a leg. A human leg, severed cleanly at the thigh, the edges torn and uneven, like it had been ripped away with force instead of cut. The skin had already started to turn gray, covered in mud and darkened blood. I screamed louder than I thought I could. My friend pulled out his phone, trying to get a signal whilst turning in a slow circle. That's when the forest behind him went silent. No wind, no insects, nothing. Then the trees started to separate like they were being forced apart. Tree trunks groaned and snapped as something massive pushed through them. I opened my mouth to warn him, but before sound came out, a shape emerged from the darkness. It was enormous, towering above the oak trees themselves. Its fur was thick and matted, soaked in a deep crimson red that looked too dark to be natural. Then I saw its bright orange eyes locked onto us. Before either of us could react, it grabbed my friend, lifted him like he weighed nothing, and threw him deep into the forest. I didn't hear his scream until I was already running. I ran faster than I ever have in my life. I couldn't feel the ground beneath my feet. All I could hear were heavy footsteps crashing behind me, shaking the earth with every step. I couldn't see, but I knew I needed to lose this creature, so I jumped off the trail into thick bushes to my right. The footsteps stopped. I stayed frozen there, shaking, crying, too afraid to breathe. That's when I remembered the napkin. I pulled it from my pocket and unfolded it with trembling hands. We had been walking in the wrong direction. We went in the complete opposite trail than what the drawn map instructed, so I slowly, carefully, crept back out and followed the path it showed. And somehow, it worked. I broke free of the trees and stumbled into sunlight right in front of our van. I jumped inside and sped straight to the Shadow Falls Police Department. When I arrived, I told them everything and showed them the wallet. They confirmed the owner of the wallet had gone missing 3 days earlier, while hiking in Redwood Forest. They told me they'd send a team out to investigate, but they never did. They tried to convince me my friend was lost, that I imagined the creature. That trauma can make the mind do strange things, but I hadn't been drinking. I hadn't taken drugs. I knew what I saw. A week later, I went back to the coffee shop. The old man was there sitting in the same booth. I sat beside him, desperate for answers. Before I could speak, he said quietly, "The beast that stalks the forest of red eats and feasts on the living and dead. Stay alert, stay quiet, or you will fall to the red giant." Submitted by /U or Strange Shadow Stories link comments. The night bus that never reached its stop. And #X200B. I don't usually share things like this, but what happened to me last year still doesn't make sense. Even now, I'm not sure if I actually survived something, or if I left a part of myself behind that night. It was around 11:30 p.m. when I boarded a local bus to go back home after visiting a friend. It was the last bus on that route, and honestly, I was just relieved I didn't have to spend the night outside. The bus was almost empty, just a few passengers sitting far apart, all quiet, all minding their own business. The conductor didn't even say anything when I got in. He just looked at me for a second, and then turned away. At first, everything felt normal. The engine noise, the occasional streetlight passing by, the slight jerks of the bus, it was all familiar. But after about 15-20 minutes, I started noticing something strange. The bus wasn't stopping anywhere, not even at the usual stops. No one was getting on or off, and the road outside, it didn't look like the usual route anymore. I tried checking my phone, but there was no network. That's when I looked around properly. The passengers, something about them felt off. They were sitting completely still. No one was talking, no one was moving. It was like they weren't even breathing. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was just tired. But then I made eye contact with one of them. He didn't blink. Not once. I quickly looked away, my heart starting to race. I decided to go and ask the conductor what was going on. As I walked toward him, I realized something even worse. The driver's face wasn't visible in the mirror. It was just dark, like a shadow sitting behind the wheel. "Baya, this isn't the usual route," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The conductor slowly turned his head toward me, and I swear I wish I had never spoken to him. He smiled, but it wasn't a normal smile. It stretched too wide, unnaturally wide. And then he said in a low voice, "You weren't supposed to get on this bus." At that moment, the bus suddenly stopped. The doors opened on their own. Outside, there was nothing. No road, no buildings, no lights, just darkness, endless darkness. I turned back to look at the passengers, and this time, all of them were staring at me, every single one. That's when panic took over. I ran toward the door and jumped out without thinking. I don't even remember hitting the ground. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the side of a highway. A truck driver was shaking me, asking if I was okay. He said he found me unconscious near the road, miles away from the nearest bus stop. I asked him if he saw a bus. He looked confused and said, "There's no bus route here at night." I never told anyone the full story, but sometimes when I'm traveling late at night, I see a bus passing by, empty, Or at least, it looks empty, because just before it disappears into the dark, I always feel like someone inside is watching me, waiting for me to get on again. Submitted by /u or don't look behind link comments. Dad said I've learned my lesson. I promise myself I won't laugh at Dad's funeral. Sitting in front of my mirror, I apply very light makeup. Dad said it was devil's paint. He liked me to look natural. Once I'm satisfied with my chalky look, my cheeks a deep, pallid white resembling a corpse, I move on to my hair. Dad didn't like hair dye. He said it was unnatural, so I spent all night recoloring my hair back to my natural brunette shade. I force a grin, the one Dad liked. I run my hands down my dress as it hangs off me. Dad said showing skin was a sin. Dad said a woman occupies a room to be seen, not heard. Dad said a woman must walk behind her husband, never in front. Dad said a woman must marry a man and have beautiful Christian babies. Dad said women loving women was a cardinal sin, that women should be hung for indecent thoughts. I've had so many indecent thoughts. Too many to count. When I was 14, I was sent to a special school where my indecent thoughts were hollowed out of me. Dad said it was necessary, that I was sick. A school with bars on the windows. A school with locked doors. A school with chairs with Velcro straps. Mandatory movie screenings. Dad said my favorite would be the one where the man and woman live happily ever after and have a beautiful Christian child. But the school wouldn't let me leave. They offered colorful candy that made me stop thinking for days on end. I lost hours staring at the ceiling and trying to find my thoughts, trying to find my tongue. I demanded to speak to my dad. I was 13. Dad would save me, right? Dad would take me home. Just a little longer, he kept saying every time he visited. I believed him. But then I turned 14 and then 15. I missed holidays and vacations. He ignored the blood on my bed sheets from my attempts to kill myself, the restraints pinning my torso and arms. Dad came to see me on my 16th birthday, wiped away my tears, and said, "It's okay, you'll learn how to find a man." Dad said the restraints were needed, that my body wasn't mine, it was God's. Dad ignored my screams for mercy, for forgiveness, when electricity rattled my bones and hemorrhaged my nose when I was told to bite down on plastic so they could drill the indecency for me. Dad said God didn't forgive me. Dad said he was ashamed of me, ashamed of my indecent thoughts, ashamed of my refusal to accept responsibility for my own actions. I was a bad kid. Daddy said a devil child who deserved to be punished. When I was 18, I was released. I walked into my father's arms and hugged him. I remember his satisfied grin, his sharp breath in my ear. "Have you learned your lesson, Rebecca? Becca, are you still there?" My girlfriend's voice crackles through my phone, which I've forgotten is still pressed to my ear. I place it on my dressing table and pick up a tube of eyeliner, screwing off the lid with trembling fingers. "Are you all right?" Anna's voice barely grazes my ears as I apply thick, extravagant strokes to my eyes, revel in that red-hot hit of dopamine, and then scrub it away. Dad said my face must always be white, always perfect, like a porcelain doll. I murmur, tying my hair into a dull ponytail. I will miss the pink streaks in my hair, but it's just for one day. Dad said my hair must never spill over my shoulders, always be in a strict, tight ponytail for my husband to tug when punishing me for my disobedience. I shake away his words. "I'm good," I say quickly. "I'm just getting ready." Anna's sigh explodes through the speaker. "Becca, I'm in the car outside. If anything happens, I'll be waiting." I smiled. "I love you." Dad said "I love you" was only reserved for my husband. Anna paused before whispering, "I love you too." I end the call, check myself over in the mirror, and leave my room. Wylan, my sister, is waiting outside. She's pale, shaking. Sculpted in Dad's suit and tie, Wylan is a nervous wreck. Dad said Wylan was a man through and through, born a man, would always be a man. Wylan was sent to the special school to become a man. Wylan still had scars on her temples and the backs of her hands. hollow eyes that pretend to be okay. Instead of speaking, I take her clammy hand with a smile. You okay? Wylan hesitates, her lip curving slightly. Yeah. Entering the funeral hall, we meet our brother, Quinn. Dad told Quinn he was sick when he was 12, that euthanasia would be the best cause of action. After all, Dad said some children weren't fit to be alive. Quinn was diagnosed with autism at 8 years old. At 10 years old, he was sent to be with the angels. Luckily, Quinn escaped. I pretend I can't sense him trembling when I take his hand, and the three of us stand over Dad's open coffin. It's just in the room. Family. For a moment, I am silent, staring down at Dad's peaceful face. My gaze lingers on the attempts to cover up the gasping wound in his chest where I plunge the knife into his heart. Quinn breaks after a moment of awkwardness. He breaks into his hands, muffling his grin, trying to suppress his hysterical giggles. Wylan is next. She smirks, doesn't laugh. I don't expect her to. And finally, I break apart. I drop to my knees and I can't stop myself anymore. I laugh until I am crying, until I am wrapped around my siblings and I am whole again. I lied. I did fucking laugh at Dad's funeral. Submitted by /u or trash Tia Link comments.